Welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited to dive into a solo episode that I've actually been thinking about doing for a while, but I just haven't come around to it. And today's episode's about 3 biggest mistakes I see homebuyers making in the market today, and hopefully, by listening, you can avoid them yourself. So stay tuned as we dive into these topics and unveil the mistakes that you can avoid when buying your first home. So, seeing these mistakes over and over again, and I think it really comes from a lack of just education. Real estate's not something that everyone gets educated on or has access to resources on or information. But the good thing is that these 3 things are really easy to fix and really easy to get ahead of. And that's actually the first one is timeline. So number 1 biggest mistake I see home buyers making is they don't start the process or conversation soon enough. They end up waiting until it's almost transactional. For example, right? I need to go buy new shoes. So you wait until your shoes really can't take it anymore. Then you go to the store and you buy new shoes. It's a transaction. You wait until your feet are to the fire, almost literally in this example, before you actually put the time and energy and effort in to make that decision or make that purchase. But real estate isn't best functioned like that. I mean, it's a significant purchase, usually the largest purchase most people make in their entire life. So you want to be prepared for it just like any other financial decision, a financial investment that you're making, especially of this caliber. And I think where people often don't do, or where people often make the mistake is they might be talking about it within their household. I want to buy a house next year. I think next year is the year we should buy something. And they put that in the back of their mind, but they don't actually take any other steps. Maybe they go out to the bar one less night a week or whatever the case. But next steps, you can talk to a loan officer or a realtor at any point. You don't have to be ready to buy today. Or you can attend a home buying class, attend a seminar, and get educated on what you should be thinking about now so that when it does come time to buy, you've already done your homework and put yourself in the best possible position to buy when the time comes. So my first piece of advice would be start your conversation early. If you are planning to buy within the next year, you should have a conversation with a loan officer and a realtor now, because that's what we do. That's what we're trained in. That's our expertise. That's why you work with us, is to give you guidance. So by starting the conversation early, you might come to find out there's actually a few things you can change or start working on ahead of time within the next year so that when the year comes up, you actually are ready to buy. But without having that conversation, you might not have realized, maybe I should work on my credit score a little bit more. Or, wow, we can actually afford a lot more home than we thought. Maybe we can start to look in some of these other areas, but I don't really know those areas. Okay, let's take the next 12 months to go explore them. Take a drive through a town that you were interested in before you actually start the process. So that when you're ready, your vision's clear, you know what you want, and you can make fast decisions, but not feel like you've made rash decisions because you've already taken the time to think about these things. So super important to start early. And one thing that I try to prioritize and really put emphasis on with my buyers is education, making sure you understand the numbers. How much do you qualify for? How much is the mortgage payment? What are closing costs? What makes up closing costs? Are you eligible for any first-time home buyer programs? Are there any different financing structures you can explore? Is there anything you can do to lower the interest rate or lower the mortgage insurance? What types of options are there with those types of things? The earlier you start to understand that process and those types of details, the more time you have to feel comfortable with your options and understand the finances. You need to know how much money you're going to spend. You need to know what your monthly payment's going to be, and you need to know the financing resources you have available to you so you know when to use them and which one's best for you. And that's something that we go through as part of the process is we'll sit down, we'll go through those numbers, we'll go through those programs, we'll go over those different structures and figure that out together. But ultimately, if you wait too long to start the process and let's say your lease is up in 2 months, you decide I want to buy a house now. Well, you don't have any time anymore. You don't have time to save up more money. You don't have time to improve your credit score. You might not have time to explore new areas. So maybe you end up just looking in 2 towns because you don't know the other 3. You don't have time to explore them. So again, if you start early, you're able to get some of that guidance from the financial perspective from your loan officer and start to get some of the geographic and practical perspective from your realtor. What areas should you be looking in? What are you looking for in a town? What are you looking for in a house? What's your approximate budget? Which you might not know your budget until you talk with a loan officer. So I think those things go in tandem together, and the sooner you start those, the better, even if you're not ready to buy today. If you're ready to buy a year from now, you should start the conversation today. Because if I was planning to spend $500,000, I would hope I'd start planning for that purchase at least a year out. But when it comes to a house, people don't think about it like that. But that's what you're doing. You're spending multiple $100,000, and you should prepare for that. So put yourself in the best possible position, because I see it too much where people wait till the end of their lease to talk to a loan officer, talk to a realtor, to get in that house within the next 3 months, and they always say, oh, I wish I had more time to do X, Y, and Z. Wish I saved up another $10,000. Oh, wish I didn't open that credit card. Well, you should have talked. You should have had that conversation, right? Make sure you take that step, because you definitely don't want to put yourself in a position where you regret where you are financially or timeline-wise because you just didn't start the conversation early enough. So can't recommend that enough. The number 2 biggest mistake I see is choosing the wrong team. Now, obviously, in any endeavor, you want to make sure you're surrounded by the right people. And especially in real estate, you want to make sure you have a loan officer who understands the type of financing you're going to look for, right? If you're looking as a first-time home buyer, you want to make sure your loan officer works with a lot of first-time home buyers, has access to all the first-time home buyer programs, and explains them to you. First-time home buyer, your loan officer should be educating you on the process, the programs, the options, the inner workings of mortgages. How do we qualify you for a loan? What is an escrow account? Why are closing costs $8,000? Who's a settlement agent? What's title insurance? Why am I paying for my home insurance up front at closing, but I'm paying for it every month? That's because here's how your escrow account works. What is mortgage insurance? Why do I need mortgage insurance? How do I get rid of it? How do I lower my rate? How do I lower my mortgage insurance? Why don't I qualify for the same program my friend did? Well, here's why. Or here's why it doesn't make sense for you. Here's the options I looked at, and here's why X, Y, and Z makes more sense for you based on your profile or your objectives. You want to make sure you're with someone who educates you through the process and comes up with a strategy with you. Because presumably, if you're a first-time home buyer, you haven't done this before. So you might not be thinking of all the possible strategies and angles to get you into the house that you want at the most affordable monthly payment, most affordable closing costs, and put yourself in the most competitive situation possible when you're making an offer. So having someone on the loan origination side that can guide you on that facet of the transaction is super important. And if your loan officer doesn't do that, you're at a serious disadvantage, not only for your own comfort level in terms of knowing how the process works, knowing what the closing costs are and all the details, but also from the offer standpoint. Now, there's many times where on a Sunday or Saturday, I get a call from a realtor and say, hey, I'm putting in an offer in with our clients. Do you have any ideas on how we can help make this offer stand out from the financing standpoint? And I'll say, yes, we can do this, we can do this, we can do that. What about if we do this? Well, then the client will say, oh, I don't know if I like the payment at those numbers, or what does that mean? We go through that strategy together. So the loan officer can actually serve as an additional resource for you to be more competitive and more confident in the offers that you make and the properties that you go for with the structures you utilize. So definitely recommend you find the right loan officer, and then obviously the right realtor partner. You want to make sure you find someone that you gel well with. Again, if you're a first-time home buyer, making sure they have the educational approach, so you get educated on the process, not only from the practical standpoint of like, how do I make an offer? What happens when we're under contract? Of course, all of those things, but also maybe on the areas you're looking in. Maybe you don't quite know where you want to be. Well, I would say you'd probably want to find a realtor who specializes in those markets. So they can tell you about the towns. They can tell you about what types of properties you're going to be looking at. What's feasible for your budget. If you said, I'm not very intimately familiar with Boston, but I know, if you said you want to buy a single family house in the city of Boston, that's for $500,000, that's probably not going to happen, right? Obviously, most people in real estate know that, but as you get more fine-tuned in your search criteria and more niche in terms of the suburbs and towns you look in, those types of questions require someone with the expertise of the area to be able to guide you on. So I think it's super important you find the right teammate there from the realtor side. Especially, if you're an investor, you want to make sure your real estate agent has experience with investors, right? Do they own properties? Do they manage properties? Have they invested in properties before? What's their experience? Same with commercial. If you're buying a business or a retail space or an industrial building, you would want someone who has experience in those types of fields to guide you, because there's going to be things you didn't think of, didn't know about, or thought you knew about but needed a better explanation on to be able to make good decisions. So find the right team, loan officer, real estate agent, and make sure that they work together, right? You want to make sure your real estate agent, your loan officer are working for you and together. I always make the reference to sports teams. If you had an offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and a head coach, and they're not talking to each other about the game plan, then you don't have a cohesive unit. You're not going to get as far as efficiently as you can because everyone's not pulling in the same direction. And when that happens, when they do pull in the same direction, a lot of work comes off your plate. Not only just purely from the stress standpoint, right? But from the workload standpoint. They're doing the work, a lot of the work for you in terms of ideas for offer structures, ideas for types of financing. They should be bringing those to the table, not you having to go on Google and research them. Like, you hire those types of people, you hire someone like myself as a loan officer for a reason, and that's to bring expertise, guidance, and direction to the table to help you feel confident and succeed in whatever you're trying to accomplish. So make sure you set yourself up with the right team who aligns with your goals and objectives and brings that guidance, direction, and support to the table. And that brings me to the third biggest mistake I see people make when buying their first home, and that is your mindset and expectations, which can certainly be a culmination of not having the right team and not starting early. You didn't know what to expect. No one told you what to expect, so you have the wrong expectations. But I think that's super important because it can really determine whether or not you're going to be successful in your home search. The analogy of you can't fit a square peg in a round hole is applicable in so many scenarios, but especially within your home search, right? If you want a 4-bed, 5-bath house, 6,000 square feet in Newport for $800,000, you're not going to get that. So similar if you want to be in a city-like environment, let's say like a Providence or a Boston, and you want to be on 2 acres of land, you can buy for whatever price you want, but you need 2 to 3 acres of land. That's a really hard property to find. So you need to make sure your expectations are set right from the property standpoint, your search criteria. What's your budget, what's your location, and what amenities are you looking for? And that's obviously where a good realtor can come in to guide you on. But you need to make sure that you have those types of conversations with yourself, with your partner, whoever you're buying this house with, so that not only you get the guidance from the real estate professionals, but you digest it and actually set those parameters. Unless you have an unlimited budget, it's very hard to hit all 3 of those criteria. Location obviously influences price, amenities influence price, and you got to balance that with your budget. So you might have to pick 2. Pick the 2 that are most important to you. Pick your budget and pick your location. All right, that means you probably have to sacrifice on the amenities. Maybe it's not quite in the best school district, or maybe, I don't really need that 3rd bedroom. Maybe I can do a 2-bedroom because this house is in my price point, it's in my location. Maybe you say, you know what? I'm okay with expanding the budget a little bit if it gets me the right location and the right amenities, right? So you kind of have to sacrifice a little bit in this market. Not really sacrifice, but reprioritize. What's most important for you? Because you might not get something that checks all the boxes. But if it checks 90% of the boxes, that's probably where you're going to have to be successful and be successful quickly, just given there's not as much inventory right now. So set your expectations right. And similar from the financing side, I think sometimes buyers come in with a false expectation, sometimes for the better. But again, that's why that conversation is so important. If you're going into a conversation with a loan officer, make sure you have an understanding of what you're looking for. There's so many times where I talk to clients and I say, what's your budget? They go, I don't know. So, okay, well, let's go through the numbers and we can figure that out together. But I say, all right, I can approve you for a mortgage payment of $4,000 a month. How does that sound to you? They go, well, I don't know. Or I say, someone goes, I want to buy $1 million house. And I say, well, your mortgage payment's probably $6,000. They go, $6,000, that'll be like $3,000, right? It's just an imbalance of expectations. So try to get an understanding of what to expect going into a conversation and what you should be looking for when you're having that conversation. What things should you be thinking about? If I'm going into a conversation with a loan officer or a realtor, what types of questions do I have, right? Think about that. Take the time to set the expectation of what you're looking for, what you're looking for from them, so everyone's on the same page. And obviously with the right people, I think that it comes pretty naturally, but I think just making sure you have put some thought into where you are financially, what you're financially comfortable with, what's your budget, how much can you spend each month, how much are you going to have available to spend in terms of cash out of pocket, for down payment or closing costs, what types of programs are available to you, so that way you understand, right? Where are things at? What options do I have? Here's what fits within my budget, my comfort zone. You got to kind of have some expectation of, well, if I'm buying a $500,000 house, my payment's probably not going to be $2,000, right? So come in with that expectation, and come in with the expectation that the loan officer you talk to is going to guide you. They're going to educate you, and they're going to give you strategies and options. Because if they don't, the expectation's not met, maybe they're not the right partner for you. So make sure you have your expectations set, especially from the home search side. Partner with the right team, and start your conversation early. If you do those three things, you're realistic with your expectations, you build yourself a powerhouse team, and you start the conversation early to prepare, you will succeed in this market, and you'll succeed in pretty much any market. If you ever have questions about the process, you don't know where to start, you want to have a conversation just to see where you're at, what types of questions should you be thinking about, all my contact information is in the show notes. I would be honored to assist.